What happens when a beloved country music icon and a seasoned morning show host go head-to-head on live television? The answer is something nobody saw coming. Faith Hill, known for her grace and composure, found herself in the middle of a heated exchange with Savannah Guthrie on the Today show that ended with the singer walking off the set. This wasn't a planned dramatic exit. This was real tension boiling over in real time, and cameras captured every second of it. Before we get into what was said that made Faith Hill reach her breaking point, make sure you're subscribed to this channel and drop a comment below telling me what you think really happened here. Now let's get into the full story of how a routine interview turned into one of the most talked about moments in morning television history. The Today Show studio was buzzing with its usual energy that morning. Crew members moved around checking cameras and adjusting lights while the production team ran through final notes. Faith Hill was scheduled as a guest to discuss her latest music project and reflect on her legendary career. It was supposed to be a warm, feel-good segment, the kind the show is known for. Savannah Guthrie, professional as always, was prepared with questions that would give Faith a chance to connect with the audience and share stories from her journey in country music. Everything seemed perfectly set up for a standard celebrity interview. Faith walked onto the set with a smile, waving to the audience as they applauded. She settled into the chair across from Savannah, and the two exchanged pleasantries as the cameras rolled. The energy was light and friendly. Savannah opened the interview with a warm welcome, talking about Faith's incredible career and how excited everyone was to have her there. Faith responded graciously, thanking Savannah and the show for having her. The first few minutes rolled along smoothly, with questions about new music and family life. Faith answered each question with a kind of charm and authenticity that made her a superstar. Then the tone began to shift. Savannah, following her notes, transitioned into questions that dug a bit deeper. She asked Faith about challenges in the music industry and how things had changed over the years. Faith answered thoughtfully, discussing the evolution of country music and how artists today face different pressures than when she started. Savannah nodded along, but then she posed a question that seemed to catch Faith slightly off guard. Savannah leaned forward and said, "There's been some conversation recently about artists from your era and whether the music holds up in today's landscape. Some critics have suggested that the storytelling in modern country has surpassed what we heard in the 90s. How do you respond to that?" Faith's expression shifted just slightly. She maintained her smile, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. She took a breath and replied, "Well, Savannah, I think that's an interesting perspective, but I'd have to respectfully disagree. The music we made in the 90s wasn't just about trends or what was popular. It was about real emotion and real stories. I stand by every song I've ever recorded, and I think if you ask the fans, they'd tell you those songs still resonate deeply today." Savannah nodded, but didn't let it go. She pressed further, saying, "Of course, and your legacy is undeniable. But there are people who feel that some of the themes in those songs feel a bit dated now. Do you think there's any validity to that criticism?" Faith's posture straightened. Her tone remained polite, but there was an edge creeping in. She said, "I think music is subjective, Savannah. What feels dated to one person might feel timeless to another. But I have to ask, where is this coming from? Is this your opinion, or are you just reading questions someone else wrote for you?" The studio seemed to get quieter. Savannah, clearly not expecting that response, gave a small laugh and said, "These are questions that have come up in recent articles and discussions. I'm simply giving you the opportunity to address them." Faith leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms slightly. She replied, "Okay, but let's be honest here. This feels less like giving me an opportunity and more like you're trying to create a narrative. I came here to talk about my music and my career, not to defend myself against unnamed critics who apparently have issues with songs that millions of people still love." Savannah's professional demeanor held, but there was tension now. She said, "Faith, I'm not trying to create anything. I'm doing my job, which is to ask the questions that people are curious about. If you feel uncomfortable answering them, we can move on." Faith shook her head. "That's the thing, Savannah. I don't feel uncomfortable answering questions. I feel uncomfortable with the way you're framing them. You're acting like my music needs defending, like it's something that has to be justified. I've sold millions of records. I've connected with audiences all over the world. My work speaks for itself," Savannah responded, "and no one is questioning your success. But part of being in the public eye is being open to critique. Surely you understand that. Faith's voice rose slightly, still controlled, but with clear frustration. Of course, I understand that. I've been in this industry for decades, but there is a difference between critique and what you're doing right now. You're sitting here implying that my music is outdated, that somehow it doesn't measure up anymore. That's not journalism, Savannah. That's disrespect. The audience was dead silent now. Savannah, maintaining her composure, said, "I'm sorry you feel that way. That truly wasn't my intention. I'm simply facilitating a conversation." Faith cut her off. "No, you're not facilitating anything. You're pushing an agenda. And what bothers me most is that you're hiding behind this idea that you're just asking questions. Own what you're saying, Savannah. If you think my music is dated, just say it." Savannah paused, clearly trying to regain control of the interview. She said, "Faith, I have enormous respect for you and your career. I think you're misunderstanding the intent here." Faith stood up. She looked directly at Savannah and said, "I'm not misunderstanding anything. I've done enough interviews to know when someone is trying to tear me down while pretending to be polite about it. I don't need this." Savannah, visibly shocked, said, "Faith, please. Let's just take a breath and continue." But Faith was already removing her microphone. She said, "No, I think we're done here. I came to share my music with your audience, not to be insulted on live television. Good luck with the rest of your show." Savannah stood up as well, her professional mask slipping just enough to show genuine concern mixed with frustration. She said, "Faith, you're not being insulted. I think you're overreacting to what was meant to be a thoughtful discussion about the industry." That word, overreacting, hung in the air like a spark near gasoline. Faith stopped in her tracks and turned back to face Savannah. Her voice was steady but ice cold. She said, "Overreacting? You just sat there and questioned the validity of my entire body of work, and now you're telling me I'm overreacting? Do you hear yourself right now?" Savannah held up her hands in a gesture that was supposed to be calming but came across as dismissive. She said, "I questioned nothing. I brought up points that are being discussed in the media. That's literally my job as a journalist. If you can't handle that level of scrutiny, then maybe you shouldn't be doing press." The crew members behind the cameras exchanged glances. This had gone far beyond a typical tense interview moment. Faith took a step closer to the interview area, not sitting back down, but standing her ground. She said, "Don't you dare tell me what I can or cannot handle. I've been doing press since before you had your first television job. I know the difference between tough questions and someone trying to make a name for themselves by tearing down a guest." Savannah's jaw tightened. She replied, "That is completely unfair, and you know it. I have never used a guest to make a name for myself. I treat every person who sits in that chair with respect, and I've built my career on integrity." Faith laughed, but there was no humor in it. She said, "Integrity, Savannah? You just spent the last 10 minutes implying that my music doesn't matter anymore. You dressed it up in polite language and called it journalism. But we both know what you were doing, and now that I'm calling you out on it, you want to play the victim." Savannah's voice rose slightly, the first real crack in her composed exterior. She said, "I am not playing the victim. You walked onto this set with an attitude from the moment we started getting into substantial questions. Maybe the problem isn't with my questions. Maybe the problem is that you don't like being challenged." Faith's eyes widened. She said, "Challenged? You think this is about me not liking being challenged? Savannah, I've faced real challenges. I've dealt with industry executives who told me I'd never make it. I've navigated a male-dominated business while raising a family. I've handled critics and setbacks and every obstacle you can imagine. Don't stand there and act like I'm some fragile person who can't handle a difficult conversation." Savannah crossed her arms. She said, "Then why are you walking off? If you're so strong and capable of handling anything, why can't you sit here and finish this interview like a professional?" The word professional seemed to strike a nerve. Faith's expression hardened even more. She said, "You want to talk about being professional? A professional journalist would have done their research properly. A professional would have asked questions that actually illuminate something meaningful instead of just stirring up controversy for ratings. A professional would know the difference between holding someone accountable and just being disrespectful." Savannah shot back, "And a professional guest would be able to engage in dialogue without turning everything into a personal attack." I asked you legitimate questions, Faith. The fact that you don't like them doesn't make them invalid. Faith shook her head slowly. She said, "You keep saying they're legitimate questions, but you haven't explained why they're legitimate. Who exactly is saying my music is dated? What critics are you referring to? Or did you and your producers just sit in a meeting and decide that it would make for good television to put me on the defensive?" Savannah hesitated for just a moment, and Faith caught it immediately. Faith said, "That's what I thought. You can't even name your sources because there aren't any real sources. You made this up to create drama." Savannah's voice went sharp. She said, "That is absolutely not true. There have been articles and social media discussions about how country music has evolved and which artists have evolved with it. Your name has come up in those discussions. I'm giving you a platform to address it." Faith replied, "A platform? You call this a platform?" "Savannah, a platform is when you invite someone on to share their story and their art. What you did was set a trap. You invited me here under the pretense of celebrating my career, and then you ambushed me with gotcha questions designed to make me look out of touch." Savannah threw her hands up slightly. She said, "This is ridiculous. Every major artist gets asked these kinds of questions. Beyoncé gets asked about staying relevant. Taylor Swift gets asked about her evolution. Why should you be any different?" Faith's voice went quiet, which somehow made it more powerful. She said, "Because Beyoncé and Taylor Swift aren't asked if their music is dated in a way that implies it's no longer valuable. They're asked how they've grown, which is a completely different framing. You didn't ask me how I've grown, Savannah. You asked me to defend the worthiness of music that has already proven its worth." Savannah opened her mouth to respond, but Faith continued. She said, "And here's what really bothers me about this whole thing. You sit in that chair every morning and you smile and you act like you're everyone's friend. But the second you get someone in front of you, you go for the jugular. And then, when they react, you act shocked and offended, like you have no idea why they're upset." Savannah's face flushed. She said, "That is not who I am. I ask tough questions because that's what good journalism requires. If you want someone to just lob you softballs and tell you how wonderful you are, go do an interview with a fan podcast." Faith smiled tightly. She said, "There it is. There's the real Savannah. You know what? I respect this version more than the fake concerned journalist act you were doing before. At least now you're being honest about your contempt." Savannah stepped closer. She said, "I don't have contempt for you, but I do expect people to be able to have adult conversations without melting down when they hear something they don't like. This is live television, Faith. Millions of people are watching this right now." Faith looked directly into the camera. Then back at Savannah, she said, "I know they're watching, and you know what they're seeing? They're seeing a host who invited a guest onto her show just to tear them down. They're seeing someone who hides behind the excuse of journalism to justify being cruel. And they're seeing me refuse to sit here and take it." Savannah's voice went cold. She said, "If standing up for journalistic integrity makes me cruel in your eyes, then I'll accept that label. But I won't apologize for doing my job." Faith picked up her purse from beside the chair. She said, "And I won't apologize for having enough self-respect to walk away from someone who clearly doesn't value what I bring to the table. You want to sit here and debate whether my music matters? Fine, do that with someone else. I'm done," Savannah said. "So, you're really just going to walk off in the middle of a live broadcast?" Faith turned back one more time. She said, "Yes, Savannah, I am. Because sometimes the most professional thing you can do is remove yourself from a situation where you're not being treated with basic respect. Your audience deserves better than watching you use guests as props for drama. And I deserve better than being one of those props." Savannah took a deep breath, and for a moment it seemed like she might try to de-escalate. Instead, she said, "You know what, Faith? Maybe you're right. Maybe you do deserve better. But so do our viewers. And they deserve a guest who can handle a real conversation without throwing a tantrum." Faith stopped walking. The word tantrum seemed to echo through the studio. She turned around slowly, and her voice was dangerously calm. She said, "A tantrum? Is that really what you think this is? Savannah, a tantrum is what a child does when they don't get their way. What I'm doing is standing up for myself against someone who has been condescending and dismissive from the moment we got past the surface-level pleasantries." Savannah folded her arms across her chest. She said, "I have not been condescending. I've been direct. There's a difference. And if you can't tell the difference, that says more about you than it does about me." Faith laughed, a sharp sound without any warmth. She said, "You've been direct. Let's talk about direct then." Direct would have been you saying at the beginning of this interview that you wanted to discuss criticisms of my work. Direct would have been giving me a heads up that this was going to be a confrontational segment. Instead, you lured me in with compliments, and then switched gears the second you thought you had me comfortable. Savannah shook her head. She said, "I don't need to give guests a warning that I'm going to ask them substantive questions. This isn't a puff piece show. We do real journalism here. And real journalism means not always telling people what they want to hear." Faith shot back, "Real journalism also means accuracy and fairness. You've been neither of those things. You've taken vague references to unnamed critics and turned them into an interrogation. You've framed my entire career as something that needs to be justified. That's not journalism, Savannah. That's an agenda." Savannah's composure was cracking further now. She said, "You keep talking about my agenda. What agenda could I possibly have? I don't benefit from making you look bad. If anything, I wanted this interview to go well. But you came in here defensive, and you've been looking for reasons to be offended." Faith's voice rose. She said, "I came in here ready to have a lovely conversation about my music and my life. You're the one who decided to turn it into an attack. And now you're trying to rewrite history and make it seem like I'm the problem. That's gaslighting." The word gaslighting seemed to hit Savannah hard. Her eyes flashed and she said, "Don't you dare accuse me of gaslighting. I have done nothing but ask you questions that any serious journalist would ask. The fact that you're so sensitive that you can't handle basic scrutiny is not my fault." Faith took several steps back toward the interview area. She wasn't sitting down, but she was directly facing Savannah now, close enough that the tension was almost visible. She said, "I am not sensitive. I am aware. I'm aware when someone is trying to manipulate a conversation. I'm aware when someone is using coded language to insult me while maintaining plausible deniability. And I'm aware that everything you've done in the last 15 minutes has been designed to provoke exactly this reaction. So you can paint me as the unreasonable one." Savannah's face was flushed now, her professional veneer almost completely gone. She said, "That is absolutely paranoid. Not everything is a conspiracy. Faith, sometimes questions are just questions. Sometimes criticism is just criticism. And sometimes when people can't handle either of those things, they lash out and blame everyone else." Faith's voice went quiet again, steady and measured. She said, "I've handled criticism my entire career. I've taken notes from producers who told me I wasn't good enough. I've read reviews that tore apart albums I poured my heart into. I've dealt with people doubting me at every turn. So don't stand there and tell me I can't handle criticism. What I can't handle, what I won't handle, is someone pretending to respect me while simultaneously trying to diminish everything. I've accomplished." Savannah threw her hands up in exasperation. She said, "I have never tried to diminish your accomplishments. Not once in this entire interview have I said anything negative about your success or your impact on country music. You're hearing things that weren't said." Faith counted off on her fingers. She said, "You questioned whether my music holds up. You suggested the themes are dated. You implied that modern country has surpassed what artists like me created. You compared me unfavorably to current artists. Every single one of those things is an attempt to diminish what I've done. And you did it all while smiling and pretending to be fair." Savannah's voice went hard. She said, "Those weren't implications. Those were questions based on real conversations happening in the music world. And you know what? Maybe there's a reason those conversations are happening. Maybe the reason you're so defensive is because on some level you know there's truth to it." The studio went completely silent. Even the crew members who had been trying to stay invisible seemed to freeze. Faith stared at Savannah for a long moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice was ice. She said, "There it is. That's what you've been wanting to say this whole time. You think my music doesn't matter anymore? You think I'm past my prime? You think I'm irrelevant? At least now you're being honest about it." Savannah's eyes widened slightly, as if she realized she'd gone too far, but she didn't back down. She said, "I didn't say any of that. I said maybe there's truth to the conversations, which is different from saying I personally believe them." Faith said, "It's really not different at all. You just gave yourself away, Savannah." This whole interview has been you trying to make me look washed up while keeping your hands clean. Well, congratulations. You got your dramatic moment? You got your confrontation? I hope it's worth whatever ratings boost you think this will give you." Savannah's voice shook slightly. She said, "I don't do this for ratings. I do this because I care about asking the questions that matter. And if that makes me the villain in your story, then fine. But I sleep well at night knowing I have integrity." Faith grabbed her purse again and slung it over her shoulder. She said, "Integrity. You just admitted on live television that you think there might be truth to the idea that my music is irrelevant. You invited me here to celebrate my career, and instead, you've spent the entire time trying to tear it down. That's not integrity, Savannah. That's cruelty dressed up as professionalism." Savannah said, "I'm not going to keep defending myself to you. If you want to leave, then leave. But don't expect me to apologize for doing my job." Faith headed toward the exit of the studio area. She said over her shoulder, "I don't expect anything from you, Savannah. I've learned exactly who you are in the last 20 minutes, and I promise you I'm not the only one who sees it." Savannah called after her, "Meaning what? Are you threatening me?" Faith stopped at the edge of the set and turned back one final time. She said, "I'm not threatening anyone. I'm simply saying that people aren't stupid. They can see what happened here. They can see how you operated. And they'll draw their own conclusions about what kind of journalist you really are." Savannah's voice was strained now. She said, "Let them draw whatever conclusions they want. I know what happened here. I asked fair questions, and you couldn't handle them." Faith shook her head slowly. She said, "Keep telling yourself that, Savannah. Maybe eventually you'll believe it. But we both know the truth. You came into this interview with an agenda, and when I didn't play along, you got nasty. That's what really happened here with that." Faith Hill walked off the Today Show set, leaving Savannah Guthrie standing alone in front of the cameras. The audience sat in stunned silence, unsure whether to applaud or gasp. Savannah stood there for a moment, visibly trying to compose herself, before finally turning to the camera and attempting to transition to the next segment. But the damage was done. The interview that was supposed to be a celebration had turned into a battle, and everyone watching had witnessed every uncomfortable second of it. So, what do you think really caused this clash? Was Savannah out of line with her questions, or did Faith overreact to legitimate journalism? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure you're subscribed because we'll be covering all the fallout from this incredible moment. What do you think Savannah should have done differently?